built this. Now I'll burn it down.
They say the best lies are built on a foundation of truth. My wife Vanessa was a master architect of deception, and I was her favorite building material. Sturdy, reliable, and completely oblivious to the blueprints. I'm Nick Callahan, 40 years old, software engineer, and apparently the world's most expensive doormat. For 12 years, I thought I had the perfect marriage. Vanessa was everything I wasn't. Beautiful, charismatic, ruthless in business, and blessed with the kind of smile that could turn a hostile takeover into a friendly merger. She ran TechFlow Solutions, a mid-sized software company that had grown from startup to industry player, thanks largely to my patents and her business acumen. Or so I believed. The morning everything changed started like any other. I was in my home office, debugging code while Vanessa prepared for another crucial board meeting. She swept in wearing her power suit, the Navy Armani that meant serious business, and planted a kiss on my cheek that felt about as warm as a software license agreement. "Working on the Patterson project?" she asked, glancing at my screens with practiced disinterest. "Actually, I'm finishing the security protocol patent. The one that's going to revolutionize—" "That's nice, honey." She was already checking her phone. "Don't wait up tonight. Grant and I have dinner with the Meridian investors." Grant Griffin, her chief operating officer, business partner, and according to the company newsletter, the driving force behind TechFlow's aggressive expansion strategy. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, athletic, silver-haired, and possessed of the kind of confident swagger that made boardrooms and country clubs feel like his personal kingdom. I should have paid more attention to how often his name came up in our conversations. I should have noticed how Vanessa's eyes lit up when she mentioned him. I should have wondered why their business dinners happened 3 times a week. But I was busy being brilliant in my basement office, crafting the code that would make us all rich, trusting my wife to handle the messy world of corporate politics while I did what I did best. Create something from nothing. The first crack in my perfect world appeared that afternoon. I was grabbing lunch from the kitchen when Vanessa's phone buzzed on the counter. She was upstairs changing, and the message preview caught my eye. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Your husband's bed is surprisingly comfortable. Gee," my sandwich hit the floor. The bread landed butter side down naturally because even the universe was conspiring against me that day. I stood there staring at that phone like it was a bomb with a countdown timer. Part of me wanted to believe it was some kind of mistake, a message meant for someone else, a joke between business partners that I was too naive to understand. The other part of me, the part that had been noticing Vanessa's late nights, her sudden interest in yoga classes that never seemed to make her more flexible, her new lingerie that I never got to see, knew exactly what I was looking at. "Nick, what's wrong?" Vanessa appeared in the doorway, hair perfect, makeup flawless, concern painted on her face like a corporate PR statement. "Your phone," I said, pointing at it like it might bite me. She glanced at the screen and, for just a moment, maybe half a second, her mask slipped. I saw something cold and calculating flash across her features before the concerned wife expression snapped back into place. "Oh, that," she laughed, the sound like ice cubes clinking in an empty glass. "Grant's such a joker. He was teasing me about working late in your office last night. You know how he is." I knew how he was, all right. Charming, confident, and apparently very comfortable in my bed. "He was here last night? Just for an hour. We had to review the Meridian presentation. I didn't want to wake you." She moved closer, placing her hand on my chest. "You've been working so hard lately. I thought you needed your sleep." Her touch felt like a branding iron. I stepped back and hurt flickered across her face. Or maybe it was annoyance at having to maintain the performance. "Nick, you're not seriously jealous of Grant, are you? He's my business partner, that's all." But I was looking at her phone again, where another message had appeared. "Meeting at the Ritz at 8, room 412, wear the red dress. G." Vanessa saw me reading and snatched the phone away, but it was too late. The truth was spreading through my chest like poison, burning away 12 years of trust and leaving nothing but ash. "I can explain," she said, but her voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by the tone she used with incompetent employees and hostile competitors. "Can you?" I asked. "Because I'd love to hear how your business partner books hotel rooms to discuss quarterly projections." She studied me for a long moment, and I could practically see the calculations running behind her eyes. cost-benefit analysis, risk assessment, damage control. Fine, she said finally. Yes, Grant and I are involved. Yes, we've been seeing each other. No, it doesn't change anything between us. The casual way she said it hit me harder than screaming would have. Like she was discussing a minor budget adjustment or a personnel change, like our marriage was just another line item in her corporate spreadsheet. Doesn't change anything, I repeated. You're having an affair with your business partner in our bed, and it doesn't change anything? Don't be dramatic, Nick. You knew this marriage wasn't exactly a grand romance. We work well together. You create, I monetize. It's been a profitable partnership. Partnership, not marriage, partnership. And Grant? Grant handles the things you can't, the networking, the schmoozing, the physical aspects of business relationships. She shrugged, like she was explaining why they'd hired a new accountant. He's good at what he does. I felt like I was drowning in shallow water. How long? Does it matter? It matters to me. She sighed, checking her watch. 2 years, maybe 3. I don't keep a diary. 2 years. While I'd been working 16-hour days to perfect the patents that built her empire, she'd been building something else entirely with Grant Griffin. I want a divorce, I said. For the first time since the conversation started, Vanessa smiled. Glee smiled, not the corporate mask she usually wore. No, Nick, you don't. The divorce papers arrived the next morning, hand-delivered by a courier who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I signed for them with hands that shook slightly, which annoyed me more than the papers themselves. I'd spent the night in my office, sleeping on the couch, and wondering how I'd been so blind for so long. Vanessa had left early, another crucial meeting, so I read through the documents alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had apparently been a lie from the start. The papers were thorough, I'll give her that. Irreconcilable differences, emotional abandonment, and my personal favorite, respondents' increasingly erratic and threatening behavior toward petitioners' business associates. I had to read that line 3 times before it sank in. Somehow, in the span of 24 hours, I'd gone from betrayed husband to dangerous stalker. My phone rang. Jules, my sister. Please tell me you're not falling apart, she said without preamble. Jules was a former Baltimore cop who'd retired after taking a bullet in the shoulder. She'd moved to private security, which mostly involved babysitting corporate executives who thought they were more important than they actually were. I'm not falling apart. Good, because I just got a very interesting call from Pete. Pete Kowalski was my college roommate, best man at my wedding, and the kind of IT genius who could hack a toaster if it looked at him wrong. He worked for a cybersecurity firm in DC, and he had the social skills of a caffeinated hermit. What kind of interesting? The kind where he tells me your wife's company just froze your access to everything. Email, servers, even the parking garage. Apparently, you're a security risk now. I wasn't surprised. Vanessa never did anything halfway, and she'd had all night to plan her next moves. What else? Pete also mentioned something about your patents. Might want to check on those. I was already moving toward my office, laptop open before Jules finished talking. My TechFlow login was dead as expected, but I had copies of everything on my personal systems. The patents were filed under my name, but the company held licensing rights for anything I developed while employed there. It took me an hour to work through the legal language, but the picture that emerged made my blood pressure spike. If Vanessa could prove I'd developed the key patents using company resources, which she could since I'd done most of the work in my home office on company time, she could claim ownership of everything. Everything I'd built. Every innovation that had made TechFlow successful. Every piece of code that had my fingerprints on it. She's gonna take it all, I told Jules when she arrived an hour later with coffee and the kind of grim expression she used to wear when delivering bad news to victims' families. Maybe she's overplaying her hand. Jules settled into the chair across from my desk, studying the papers I'd spread out like battle plans. Tell me about Grant Griffin. What about him? Everything. How long has he been with the company? What's his background? Does he have access to your work? I thought about it. Grant had joined TechFlow about 3 years ago, hired personally by Vanessa to handle business development and investor relations. He was smooth, connected, and had a talent for making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. He has administrative access to most systems. Vanessa insisted on it when she promoted him to COO last year, said he needed to understand the technical side of the business. Convenient. Jules was making notes in the small notebook she always carried. What about finances? Does he handle money? Some. He manages the investor accounts, handles contract negotiations. I paused. Why? Because in my experience, guys like Grant Griffin don't just steal wives. They steal everything they can get their hands on. The idea hadn't occurred to me, but it made sense. Grant was ambitious, charming, and had access to everything that mattered at TechFlow. If he was planning to eliminate me from the picture, why stop at just taking my wife? We need help, Jules said. The kind of help that doesn't ask too many questions about how information gets obtained. Pete? Pete. Pete arrived that evening with a laptop bag that probably cost more than my first car and the kind of pale complexion that suggested he hadn't seen sunlight in several weeks. He set up in my office like he was establishing a military command center, cables and external drives spreading across every available surface. "This is bad, Nick," he said without looking up from his screens. "They've locked you out of everything, and I mean everything. Email, cloud storage, even the coffee machine database. Can you get me back in? Probably. But that's not the interesting part." Pete's fingers flew across his keyboard with the kind of precision that made me jealous. "The interesting part is what they're not trying to hide." He turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was a series of financial reports, transaction logs, and what looked like internal company communications. "I may have stumbled across some publicly available information," Pete said with the kind of innocent expression that wouldn't fool a kindergarten teacher. "And by publicly available, I mean Grant Griffin is either really bad at cybersecurity or really good at embezzlement." The numbers on the screen told a story I recognized from corporate fraud documentaries. Money moving in unusual patterns, contracts with shell companies, payments to consultants who didn't seem to exist. "How much?" I asked. "Hard to say without digging deeper, but I'd estimate somewhere north of $2 million over the past 18 months. $2 million. Enough to buy a lot of hotel rooms and red dresses. Enough to make a man very interested in gaining complete control of a profitable company." "There's more," Pete said. "Grant's been in contact with Meridian Industries, not just the investor meetings Vanessa knows about. Private communications going back 6 months. Meridian was TechFlow's biggest competitor, a corporate giant that had been trying to acquire smaller firms in our market segment. If Grant was feeding them information, he's setting up a takeover," I said. "Looks that way. And with you out of the picture, he and Vanessa would be the primary beneficiaries when Meridian makes their offer." I leaned back in my chair, pieces clicking into place. The affair wasn't just personal, it was business. Grant hadn't just stolen my wife, he'd recruited her as a partner in stealing my company. "What do we do?" Jules asked. I looked at the evidence scattered across my desk, at the divorce papers that painted me as an unstable threat, at the financial records that showed how thoroughly I'd been played. "We play their game," I said, "but we play it better." The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 12 years of marriage. I hired a lawyer without telling Vanessa. Marcus Steinberg had the kind of reputation that made opposing counsel nervous and clients confident. His office overlooked Baltimore's Inner Harbor, and his fees were high enough to make me grateful for the money I'd saved by living modestly while Vanessa spent freely on business expenses. "Your wife is good," he said after reviewing the divorce papers. "Thorough, strategic, and completely ruthless. I respect that in an opponent. Can you beat her? That depends on how dirty you're willing to get." Steinberg was in his 60s, with gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that suggested he'd seen every trick in the book and invented a few of his own. "She's claiming ownership of your intellectual property based on your employment agreement. That's a strong position, legally speaking. But intellectual property law is complex, and employment agreements can be challenged under the right circumstances, especially if we can prove the company violated the terms of your agreement first." I thought about Pete's discoveries. What kind of violations? Fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty. If your wife and her business partner have been looting the company, that changes everything. Steinberg leaned forward. "Tell me about Grant Griffin." I told him everything Pete had found, watching his expression grow more interested with each detail. When I finished, he was smiling like a shark who had just spotted a wounded seal. "This is good, Nick. Very good. But we need more than financial irregularities. We need proof of intent, documentation of the conspiracy, evidence that links the embezzlement to the plan to force you out." "How do we get that?" "We make them think they're winning." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would appear to cave to Vanessa's demands, agree to a settlement that gave her most of what she wanted, and hope that success made her and Grant careless. Meanwhile, Pete would dig deeper into their communications, Jules would conduct surveillance, and Steinberg would prepare for a legal battle that would make Vanessa's divorce papers look like a parking ticket. One more thing, Steinberg said as I prepared to leave. Don't go home tonight, or any night for the foreseeable future. Get a hotel room. Establish a paper trail that shows you're complying with the separation. We don't want to give them ammunition for a restraining order. So I spent that night in a Hampton Inn near BWI, eating takeout Chinese and reviewing everything I knew about my wife's business practices. It wasn't a pleasant exercise. Vanessa had always been ambitious, but I'd assumed her methods were legal, if not always ethical. Now I was seeing patterns I'd missed before, contracts that favored tech flow in unusual ways, competitors who'd mysteriously dropped out of bidding processes, employees who'd left suddenly. After asking uncomfortable questions, my phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. We need to talk. Meet me at the house tomorrow at 2 p.m. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I'll be there. The next afternoon, I arrived at the house I'd helped pay for to find Grant Griffin's BMW in the driveway, because apparently, even our separation negotiations required his input. Vanessa met me at the door wearing jeans and a sweater, casual clothes that were supposed to make her seem approachable and reasonable. Grant stood behind her in the foyer, arms crossed, radiating the kind of protective energy that would have been touching if he hadn't been screwing my wife in my bed. Thank you for coming, Vanessa said, leading me to the living room. I know this is difficult, but I think we can work something out that benefits everyone. Everyone? I asked, glancing at Grant. Grant is here as my business advisor, she said smoothly. This affects the company, so his input is valuable. Grant stepped forward with his hand extended, like we were meeting for the first time at a networking event. Nick, I want you to know there are no hard feelings on my end. Business is business. I looked at his hand for a moment, then at his face, then back at his hand. Business is business, I repeated. Is that what you call it? His smile faltered slightly, but he kept his hand extended. I understand you're upset, but we're all adults here. We can handle this professionally. Professionally. I turned to Vanessa. Is that how you describe the past 3 years? 2 years, she corrected automatically, then caught herself. And yes, I'd prefer to handle this professionally. Emotions just complicate things. We sat down in the living room where we'd hosted dinner parties and watched movies and pretended to be a happy couple. Grant took the chair that had always been mine, a power play so obvious it was almost funny. Here's what I'm prepared to offer, Vanessa said, producing a folder thick with legal documents. You keep your personal assets, your car, your savings, your retirement accounts. I keep the house, the company, i.e., and the intellectual property rights to everything you developed during your employment. That's everything I've worked on for 12 years. That's everything the company paid you to work on for 12 years, Grant interjected. Vanessa's being generous by letting you keep your personal assets. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something that surprised me. Fear. Just a flicker, quickly hidden, but unmistakable. He was afraid of me. Not physically, Grant was bigger, younger, probably in better shape. He was afraid of what I might know, what I might do, what damage I could cause to his carefully constructed plans. That fear gave me hope. I need time to consider this, I said, closing the folder without reading it. Time is a luxury we don't have, Grant said. The Meridian deal is moving forward, and we need this resolved before— Grant! Vanessa's voice was sharp. That's not relevant to this discussion. But it was relevant, and now I knew it. The timeline was tight because Meridian was making their move, and Grant needed me neutralized before the acquisition went through. What Meridian deal? I asked innocently. Nothing that concerns you, Vanessa said, but her eyes flicked to Grant in a way that told me everything I needed to know. I stood up. I'll have my lawyer review this and get back to you. Don't take too long, Nick, Grant said. Generous offers have expiration dates. As I walked to my car, I could feel them watching me from the window. 2 predators who thought they'd cornered their prey, not realizing that the prey had teeth of his own. That night, I called Pete. How quickly can you get me everything on the Meridian deal? Give me until morning, he said. And Nick, you might want to call Jules. I think we're going to need her particular skill set. Why? Because Grant Griffin just made a very expensive mistake, and I don't think he's going to take losing well. Jules arrived at my hotel room the next morning with coffee, bagels, and a manila folder that looked like it contained someone's death warrant. "Your boy Grant has been busy," she said, spreading photographs across the small table by the window. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, a very interesting paper trail that shows he's been living well above his declared salary. The photos showed Grant at expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and what appeared to be a private golf club, all places that required serious money more than a COO's salary could reasonably support. "Pete found the source," Jules continued. "Grant's been skimming from the Meridian negotiations. Every time they increase their offer, he finds a way to redirect a percentage into consulting fees for shell companies he controls." "How much?" "So far, about 3.7 million. But here's the interesting part. He's not keeping it all. Some of it's going into an account with Vanessa's name on it." I studied the bank records Pete had somehow acquired. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for: money flowing from Meridian through TechFlow and into various accounts, with Grant and Vanessa taking their cut at every step. "They're not just stealing from me," I realized. "They're stealing from Meridian, too, and from TechFlow's other shareholders, and probably from the IRS. Jules pulled out another set of documents. "But that's not the best part. The best part is that Grant's been sloppy. He's been using company email for some of these transactions, and he's been meeting with Meridian representatives without Vanessa's knowledge." "He's planning to cut her out?" "Looks that way. Once the acquisition goes through and you're out of the picture, Vanessa becomes a liability. She knows too much, and she's not as useful as she thinks she is." The irony was almost beautiful. Vanessa thought she was using Grant to eliminate me and take control of the company. Grant was using her to eliminate me and take control of the company. And I was the only one who could see the whole picture. My phone rang. Steinberg. "Nick, we have a problem. Vanessa just filed for an emergency restraining order. She's claiming you threatened her and Grant yesterday." "That's ridiculous. I know. But she has a witness who says you made threatening statements about destroying the company and everyone in it." "Grant, of course. What does this mean?" "It means you can't go near the house, the company, or either of them until we get this sorted out. It also means they're accelerating their timeline. Something has them spooked." After hanging up, I turned to Jules. "They're trying to box me in, keep me away from the evidence, isolate me from anyone who might help." "Then we don't play defense," she said. "We go on the attack." The attack began that afternoon. While I stayed in my hotel room like a good little restraining order target, Jules and Pete went to work. Jules followed Grant to his lunch meeting with a Meridian executive at an upscale steakhouse in downtown Baltimore. She got photos, audio recordings, and enough evidence to prove that Grant was negotiating side deals without Vanessa's knowledge. Pete, meanwhile, was doing what Pete did best: turning Grant's technological sophistication against him. Every email, every phone call, every digital transaction was being recorded and archived. "He's getting paranoid," Pete reported that evening. "Changed his passwords 3 times today, started using encrypted messaging apps, even bought a burner phone." "Too late for security," Jules added. "We already have enough to bury him. The question is how we want to use it." I thought about that question for a long time. Grant and Vanessa had spent 2 years planning my destruction, using my trust and my work to build their own empire. They'd stolen my marriage, my company, and my future. But they had made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was the same naive engineer who'd trusted them for so long. They thought I'd roll over and accept their generous offer, grateful for whatever scraps they threw my way. They were wrong. "We're going to destroy them," I said. "Not just stop them, not just expose them. We're going to take everything they've built and burn it to the ground." Jules smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Now you're talking my language." The plan we developed over the next 2 days was complex, risky, and probably illegal in several jurisdictions. It was also the most satisfying thing I'd ever contemplated. Phase 1. We would let Grant think his paranoia was justified by feeding him false information through channels we knew he was monitoring. Make him believe I was planning something desperate and stupid. Phase 2. We would approach Meridian directly with evidence of Grant's embezzlement, positioning ourselves as concerned whistleblowers trying to protect them from a fraudulent deal. Phase 3. We would trigger a cascade of investigations, SEC, IRS, State Attorney General, that would tear TechFlow apart and leave Grant and Vanessa fighting for their lives instead of fighting over my assets. Phase 4. While they were dealing with federal investigators and criminal charges, I would quietly reclaim ownership of my patents and intellectual property, leaving them with nothing but legal bills and prison sentences. It's ambitious, Steinberg said when I outlined the plan. Also potentially catastrophic if it goes wrong. What's the worst that could happen? You could go to prison. You could lose everything. You could end up worse off than you are now. I thought about Vanessa's casual dismissal of our marriage, Grant's smug confidence, the way they'd planned my destruction while I worked 16-hour days to build their empire. I'm already worse off than I can imagine, I said. At least this way, I'm not going down alone. All right, Steinberg said. Let's burn it all down. The beauty of a well-constructed trap is that the prey walks into it willingly, convinced they're pursuing an opportunity rather than approaching their doom. Grant Griffin was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Phase 1 began with Pete creating a series of fake email accounts and social media profiles designed to look like they belonged to disgruntled TechFlow employees. These fictional whistleblowers began reaching out to Grant, offering to sell information about my desperate plans to sabotage the Meridian deal. Grant took the bait immediately, arranging meetings with these imaginary sources and paying them for intelligence that painted me as an increasingly unhinged threat to everyone involved. According to our fictional employees, I was planning to steal company data, leak confidential information to competitors, and possibly resort to physical sabotage. The beauty of it was that Grant's paranoia made him believe every word. He increased security at the office, hired a private investigator to follow me, and even purchased what appeared to be a tool-shaped item, a fact that Jules discovered during one of her surveillance runs. He's scared, she reported, after watching Grant visit a tool store in Virginia. Scared people make mistakes? While Grant was chasing shadows, I was having a very real conversation with Meridian's head of acquisitions, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Wells, who listened to my story with the kind of professional skepticism that made me respect her immediately. You're telling me that your wife and her business partner have been embezzling money from acquisition negotiations? She asked, reviewing the documents Pete had compiled. I'm telling you that I discovered some irregularities and thought you should be aware of them before finalizing any deals, I said carefully. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. Wells studied the bank records, email transcripts, and financial analyses that laid out Grant's scheme in devastating detail. This is comprehensive. How did you obtain some of these documents? I'm still technically a TechFlow employee. Some of this information was accessible through normal channels. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. The key was giving Meridian enough legitimate evidence to justify their own investigation, which would inevitably uncover everything Pete had found and more. I'll need to discuss this with our legal team, Wells said. If these allegations are accurate, it could affect our entire acquisition strategy. I understand. I just thought you should know what you're potentially buying. 2 days later, Meridian suspended all negotiations with TechFlow pending a comprehensive audit of the company's financial records. The announcement sent TechFlow's stock price into freefall and triggered exactly the kind of panic I'd been hoping for. Vanessa called me that afternoon, her voice tight with controlled fury. What did you do? I don't know what you mean. Don't play stupid, Nick. Meridian just pulled out of the deal. They're demanding a full audit, and they specifically mentioned irregularities in our financial reporting. That sounds serious. Maybe you should talk to your accountants. This is you, isn't it? You're trying to destroy the company out of spite. Vanessa, I'm sitting in a hotel room under a restraining order that prevents me from going anywhere near the company. How exactly would I be destroying anything? She was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically hear her mind working through the possibilities. If you think this helps your position in the divorce, you're wrong. All you're doing is reducing the value of the assets we're fighting over. Maybe I'd rather have half of nothing than nothing of something. You're making a mistake, Nick. A big one. The line went dead, and I allowed myself a small smile. Vanessa was starting to realize that her carefully constructed plan was falling apart, but she still didn't understand how or why. That understanding came 3 days later when the FBI raided TechFlow's offices as part of a federal investigation into securities fraud and embezzlement. I watched the news coverage from my hotel room, eating pizza and enjoying the sight of federal agents carrying boxes of evidence out of the building where I'd spent 12 years of my life. The reporter mentioned that the investigation had been triggered by a whistleblower complaint and involved potential fraud in connection with a major acquisition deal. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, former colleagues, even some of TechFlow's clients. But I didn't answer. I was waiting for one specific call, and it came just after the evening news ended. "You son of a witch!" Grant's voice was raw with rage and what sounded like genuine fear. "You think you're clever, don't you? I think I'm sitting in a hotel room under a restraining order, just like the court ordered. You know what I'm talking about. The FBI, the audit, all of it. You set this up. Grant, I'm a software engineer, not a federal prosecutor. I don't have the power to set up FBI investigations. But you have the power to feed them information. You have access to company records, financial data, all the ammunition they need to destroy everything we've built." "We? I wasn't aware you'd built anything, Grant. I thought you were just an employee." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. When he spoke again, his voice was different, calmer, more controlled, but somehow more menacing. "This isn't over, Nick. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. Vanessa and I have resources, connections, ways of handling problems that you can't imagine." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. You've made this personal, and personal problems require personal solutions." This time he did hang up, and I immediately called Jules. "We may have a problem," I told her. "Grant just threatened me, and he sounded like he meant it." "Good," she said. "Threats mean he's desperate, and desperate people make the kind of mistakes we can use in court. Did you record the call?" "Of course." "Then we have him on extortion and witness intimidation. This just keeps getting better." But I wasn't feeling celebratory. Grant's tone had suggested someone who'd moved beyond legal consequences and into the realm of direct action. Someone who'd decided that if he was going down, he was taking me with him. "Jules, I think we need to accelerate the timeline. Grant's not going to wait for the legal system to play out." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time for phase 4. Before Grant decides that the simplest solution to his problem is making me disappear." That night, I began the process of reclaiming my intellectual property. With TechFlow under federal investigation and its corporate structure in chaos, the employment agreements that had bound my patents to the company were effectively void. Steinberg had prepared the paperwork weeks ago, and now it was just a matter of filing the right documents with the right agencies. By morning, I would own my patents again. By afternoon, I would be negotiating licensing deals with TechFlow's competitors. By evening, Grant and Vanessa would wake up to discover that the empire they'd tried to steal was built on sand. But first, I had to survive whatever Grant was planning. And based on the look in his eyes during our confrontation at the house, that might be the hardest part of all. The attack came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, which seemed unnecessarily dramatic even for Grant Griffin. I was awake, sitting by the window of my hotel room with a cup of coffee and Pete's latest intelligence reports, when I saw the black SUV pull into the parking lot with its headlights off. 3 men got out, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested military training or at least expensive private security experience. Jules had insisted I install a panic button app on my phone after Grant's threatening call, and I triggered it while speed dialing emergency. The app would send my location to Jules, Pete, and Steinberg simultaneously while recording everything through my phone's microphone. "Emergency, what's your emergency?" "This is Nick Callahan, at the Hampton Inn on Elk Ridge Landing Road. 3 armed men just entered the building, and I believe they're here to harm me." The operator's voice was calm and professional. "Are you in immediate danger, sir?" "I'm about to be." I could hear them in the hallway now, their voices low but audible through the thin hotel walls. They'd gotten my room number somehow, probably from the same private investigator Grant had hired to follow me. "Sir, officers are en route. Is there somewhere you can hide until they arrive?" The bathroom had no windows and a lock that wouldn't stop a determined child, let alone 3 professionals. The closet was too small. That left the balcony, which was on the 4th floor, and overlooked a parking lot that would turn me into street pizza if I fell. "Not really," I told the operator. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I heard the electronic beep of a key card being used. They'd gotten access from hotel management or hacked the system. Either way, they were coming in. I grabbed my laptop bag and headed for the balcony, closing the sliding door behind me as quietly as possible. The October air was cold enough to make me wish I'd grabbed a jacket, but hypothermia was the least of my problems. Through the glass, I watched 3 men enter my room with the kind of professional efficiency that made my blood run cold. They weren't here to scare me or rough me up. They were here to solve Grant's problem permanently. The leader was checking the bathroom while the other two searched the closet and under the bed. It would take them about 30 seconds to realize I wasn't in the room, and maybe another 10 to figure out where I'd gone. I looked over the balcony railing. 4 floors down to concrete, with no convenient awnings or fire escapes to break my fall. The balconies below me were too far to reach, and the ones to either side were separated by gaps that would require Olympic-level athletic ability to cross. But there was a maintenance ladder about 6 feet to my left, attached to the building's exterior wall and leading up to the roof. If I could reach it, the sliding door opened behind me. "Mr. Callahan." The voice was calm, professional, almost polite. "We need to talk." I turned around slowly, hands visible and empty. The man pointing a tool at me was in his 40s, average height and build, with the kind of forgettable face that probably served him well in his profession. "About what?" "About the problems you've been causing for our employer. Problems that need to be resolved." "I assume we're talking about Grant Griffin." "We don't use names, Mr. Callahan, but yeah, you've been making life difficult for someone who values his privacy." The other 2 men had joined us on the balcony, effectively blocking any retreat back into the room. I was trapped between armed professionals and a 4-story drop, which significantly limited my negotiating position. "What kind of resolution did you have in mind?" "The kind where you disappear, permanently." In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. The emergency operator had done her job, but unless the police had developed teleportation technology, they weren't going to arrive in time to save me. "You know the FBI is investigating Grant," I said, playing for time. "Ending me won't make that go away. If anything, it'll make things worse for him." "Mr. Griffin," the leader caught himself. "Our employer is confident that the investigation will stall without your cooperation. Dead witnesses don't testify." The sirens were getting closer, but not close enough. I had maybe 2 minutes before these professionals decided to cut their losses and eliminate the problem standing in front of them. That's when Jules appeared in the doorway behind them, moving like a shadow with a tool in her hands, and the kind of expression that had probably terrified suspects during her police career. "Baltimore PD," she shouted, which wasn't technically true anymore, but sounded authoritative enough. "Drop your tools." The 3 men spun toward her, which gave me the opening I needed to dive toward the maintenance ladder. I caught the railing with both hands, my laptop bag swinging wildly as I pulled myself over the balcony edge. Bursts of impact erupted behind me, Jules engaging the professionals in the kind of firefight that would give hotel management nightmares for years. I focused on climbing hand over hand up the ladder toward the roof, while projectiles whined past my head and embedded themselves in the building's brick facade. The roof was flat, covered with HVAC equipment and satellite dishes that provided decent cover from anyone firing from below. I crouched behind an air conditioning unit and called emergency again. "This is Nick Callahan. I'm on the roof of the Hampton Inn. There's an active threat on the 4th floor, and I need immediate assistance." "Sir, officers are already on scene. Stay where you are and keep your head down." Good advice, which I followed while listening to the chaos below. More sirens, shouted commands, and what sounded like a small war being fought in the hotel corridors. It took 20 minutes for a SWAT team to reach the roof and confirm that I wasn't a threat. By then, the hostilities had stopped, and the hotel was swarming with police, paramedics, and federal agents who'd been monitoring the situation as part of their ongoing investigation into TechFlow. Jules met me in the lobby, her left arm in a sling, but otherwise intact. "1 dead, 2 in custody," she reported. The leader took a round when he tried to force his way past me. The other 2 surrendered when the SWAT team arrived. "Grant? In federal custody as of an hour ago. Turns out hiring assassins to eliminate witnesses in a federal investigation is frowned upon by the authorities." I felt something that might have been relief, if relief could be mixed with exhaustion, adrenaline crash, and the surreal knowledge that someone had just tried to homicide me in a Hampton Inn. "What about Vanessa?" "Also in custody. The FBI had been monitoring her communications with Grant, and when he decided to go kinetic, she became an accessory to attempted homicide." The next few hours were a blur of police interviews, federal debriefings, and medical examinations that confirmed I was physically unharmed, but probably going to need therapy for the foreseeable future. But through it all, one thought kept running through my mind. It was over. The 2-year nightmare of betrayal, theft, and attempted homicide was finally over. Grant and Vanessa had gambled everything on a plan that required my silence, my compliance, and my continued naivety. When I refused to play the victim, they'd escalated to increasingly desperate measures, each one creating more evidence of their crimes and drawing more attention from law enforcement. In the end, their greatest strength, their willingness to do anything to win, had become their fatal weakness. They'd been so focused on destroying me that they'd destroyed themselves instead. As I sat in Steinberg's office the next morning, signing papers that would transfer my patents back to my name and establish licensing agreements with 3 of TechFlow's former competitors, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now you get rich," Steinberg said. "Your patents are worth significantly more as independent intellectual property than they were as part of TechFlow's portfolio. I'd estimate you're looking at somewhere between 50 and 70 million in licensing fees over the next 5 years. $50 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having, built on the work that Grant and Vanessa had tried to steal. And them? Grant's looking at 25 to life for conspiracy, embezzlement, and attempted homicide. Vanessa will probably plea bargain down to 10 to 15 years, assuming she cooperates with the federal investigation." I thought about that for a moment. 25 years in federal prison for Grant, a decade or more for Vanessa. Their empire destroyed, their reputations ruined, their freedom forfeit. It was more than I dared hope for when this all started. "There's one more thing," Steinberg said, producing a final document. "The house. Since it was purchased with embezzled funds, the federal government is seizing it as part of their asset forfeiture case. But they're willing to sell it back to you at fair market value if you're interested." I looked at the deed to the house where I'd lived for 8 years, where I'd trusted my wife and built my patents and believed in a future that had turned out to be a lie. "No," I said, "let someone else have it. I'm done with that life." As I walked out of Steinberg's office and into the Baltimore sunshine, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years: hope. Not for revenge or justice or even closure, but for the simple possibility of building something new. Grant and Vanessa had tried to take everything from me: my work, my money, my marriage, and ultimately my life. Instead, they'd given me something far more valuable: the knowledge that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, smarter than they'd assumed, and capable of fighting back when everything I cared about was on the line. They'd wanted to destroy me. Instead, they'd set me free.